everyone, my name is Sherry and I'm the person behind Brush Paint Studio on Vintage in Konstantin, Poland. Today is part 2 of the series that I'm doing on flipping furniture. It's the first part of the second video, so stay tuned. I thought it might be interesting to show you the process that I go through and the tools that I use in order to get a piece of furniture from looking like this to looking like something completely different and sellable. Before everybody starts freaking out and saying, oh my god, how can she paint this? This is a veneer. This is veneer on MDF. It's not quality, it's mass produced. It does look beautiful, the veneer is really quite beautiful, but there's no quality to it. Just as an example, this piece isn't wood, this back isn't wood. It looks nice, but there's no quality to it. So I have no guilt when painting a piece of furniture like this because it turns out beautiful. So the first thing I like to do is take my piece of furniture apart. That includes taking off doors, taking out drawers, hinges, everything. So you'll need a screwdriver. I recommend something like this. It has different bits to it, the cross, it has, you know, all the bits you may need. And so what I'll do is take all the drawers out and then take all the knobs out, and then I'll be ready for the next step. I think I might keep these. These are quite nice. So the next step that I need to do is to clean this piece. It feels kind of waxy. It may have been cleaned with silicone. It may have been cleaned in a smoker's house, or it may have been in a smoker's house. I have no idea where it's been, so no question, it needs to be cleaned. So I have this TSP alternative from Fusion, if you can see that. It's not a true TSP, but what you do is you mix it with water and use a cloth or a kitchen sponge. This is the water. I'll show you how it looks when I'm done cleaning. You'll be shocked. I like to use the TSP alternative, but it is possible to use, for example, something that you have around the house. You don't have to go break the bank on a cleaner. You can use diluted vinegar with a squeeze of dish soap. There's TSP, like true TSP. It usually comes in a powdered form. Mix that with water, but with TSP, you actually have to rinse. The TSP alternative, you don't usually have to rinse. So yeah, my next step is cleaning. So unfortunately, it's just the way it goes. Okay, so I've cleaned this all with the TSP alternative, just as a side. This is the water. You saw how I started out, it was clear water. And this is just after cleaning with the sponge and the cloth and to wipe down a little scrub where the sticker was. And this is how dirty the water is. So that's why I'm saying you have to clean your furniture before you paint, because you just never know what is actually on the furniture. And I think I may have a difficult time with this. I'm going to see with the next step, but while I was cleaning, the water was really beating up. And typically when that happens, there's some sort of silicone spray that the furniture factories like to put on their furniture. So because of the beating water, I may have to change my plan, but we'll see with the next step. So I just have to let this dry, and then I will be back with the next step. So the furniture has been cleaned, and now I'm on to the next step, which is sanding. And depending on which type of paint you use, you won't need to sand every piece of furniture, but I like to sand every piece of furniture. It just ensures that the paint will adhere without any issues. It smooths the surface. It may have bumps that you can't see. So regardless of the type of paint I use, and this is just my personal preference, I will sand all pieces. And what I mean by sanding is literally just a scuff sand to mat the surface of the furniture. And I've got three things that I like to use. Typically I'll use a 150 to 180 sandpaper, grit sandpaper, just to mat the surface. It takes off any bumps. I'll also use a sanding sponge, which is flexible, as you can see, and this is really great for getting into details, wrapping around a little bit. It's really great for legs and spindles as well, because you can wrap around and really sand quite well. And then a harder sanding block sponge. And this is actually really great, because what I'll do with this as well is I'll wrap the sandpaper around it, just to give a little bit more even pressure. So yeah, my next step is sanding. So I'll get going. So a little tip about sanding, always sand in the direction of the grain of wood. That's with regards to painting. This is quite standard with sanding, painting, staining. You always go with the grain of the wood. So I've sanded the top. This piece is not what I expected. Happens sometimes. So I think I'm going to have to put a primer on, but I'm not at that stage yet. I'm still at the sanding stage. So what I've done is I've sanded the top. You can see it's quite matte. The sanding, it was like white dust. It was completely strange. I've never had that happen before. But anyway, so I'm going to sand everything down. I've only done the top, but I just wanted to show you, after sanding, use a tack cloth to take up all the dust. Or what I like to use for crevices and details is a soft brush that can get into the cracks and the details and take the dust out before you start to paint. Because painting on dust will be problematic for the adhesion of the paint. Okay, sand and dusted, what's the next step? Well, if you've got any holes or any scratches, you'll need to fill them in before you start painting. So I have this wood filler. It's a dark brown, so when it dries, it'll closely match the existing finish. I just have really superficial scratches, so it'll probably just take one go over with the putty, and once it's dry, I'll sand it smooth. If you have deeper scratches or holes, you may have to do it in 2 stages. Do the first part, let it dry, do the second part, and then once it's dry, you can sand over it. Okay, so while the putty is drying on the top of the cabinet or the chest of drawers, I'm going to continue on with the drawers, the next step on the drawers. And what I've decided to do is use a primer. And I have a choice. There's Zinserbin, which I'm sure all of you know. It's the Polish writing. There is a red one and a blue one. The red one is actually really great if you're trying to block stains because it's a shellac based. I don't have that one at the moment. I just have the blue one. So what I'm going to do is 1 or 2 coats, we'll have to wait and see, of this. And before I move on to the painting. And the reason that I'm going with the primer is that this is a high adhesion primer, and I'm just a little bit unsure of the surface just because when I'm sanding it was coming off in a white powder. I just don't know what's on the top. So, and I don't do this for everything. I usually try not to use a primer, but I'm going to give it a shot today to see what happens. So next step, primer. Make sure you shake it. With the brush, I'm just going to apply it. You can apply it with a roller, but I like to use a brush when I'm painting. It gets into details. So this seems to be adhering quite well, so I think I'll keep on going with it. Just a little bit of information about a primer and when to use one. So just for example, in my situation, I'm not sure about the surface of this, if it has some sort of finish that might resist the paint on its own. So I've decided to go with a primer. If you are going from drastically dark furniture to painting very light, I would suggest a primer. Some woods like mahogany and cherry are prone to bleeding. And basically what that means is that there are tannins in the wood that will bleed through the paint. So you will actually need the shellac one, which is the red label, and that will block the tannins from being released into the paint. Another situation is if you're painting furniture from the 30s or the 40s. Back then they used to finish or use a stain that had linseed oil in it, and the linseed oil will bleed through the paint. So that's when you would need to use a shellac based. So yeah, a couple of options for you. I also have this one from Fluger, which is a Danish company. It's not bad, it's pretty good, it's decent, but I'm quite positive the best one on the market is the red Zinsser bin. Okay, so while the primer is drying, I just want to take a moment and talk about the different kinds of brushes that I like to use. Now, for a beginner, I'm not recommending that you go out and buy the best brushes that are on the market. A brush from any of the big box stores will be just fine. You might be a little frustrated with the hair, the bristles that fall out, because cheaper brushes have a tendency to have cheaper glue and are made cheaply, essentially. But if you progress in this further, what I recommend are more professional brushes. My favorite, you can see these are well loved. My favorite are Klingon brushes. And they come in a few different sizes of flat, a few different sizes of oval, and a few different sizes of round. There's also an angled brush, there's a shorter handled brush, there's a wide one. These are just my personal favorites. This was the first one I got. It's about 5 years old, and I used this brush to paint the chest of drawers, and it still works as if I got it yesterday. So they're worth the investment. They are more expensive. They're not super high priced, but they are higher priced than what you would find at the big box stores. But from my perspective, having a brush for 5 years, it's worth the extra money. And there's no rules really for which brush to use. It's personal preference. I like to use the flat brushes. That's just my thing. Some people like the round, some people like the oval. If you have the opportunity to try different brushes, just to figure out which ones you like, it's worth the time. But I will use the smaller, this is 3 centimeters wide, and I will use this around chair stretchers or spindles and chairs, things like that. Stuff that has picky kind of fussy details and you have to really get in, so I like to use that one. But I would say my go-to, the one that I use all the time, is the F40, which is 4 centimeters wide. And this is my favorite brush, but as you can see, I have used them all by just the amount of paint that they have on them. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please stay tuned for the second part of the second video in this series of flipping furniture for beginners. So stay tuned.